think the key point is that it's not news that the international regulatory situation is challenging, and still we see a huge momentum coming from bottom-up domestic mechanisms being established, not just in developed economies but also in developing economies. And overall, their level of ambition is even increasing compared to the existing schemes. In other words, they have clearly learned from past experiences, and they have developed mechanisms that are not just flexible, but sufficiently robust to deal with the macroeconomic changes which were not expected in the beginning. So all of those are showing that they are, in a sense, getting well developed, looking for the right word, prepared to deal for a carbon pricing 2.0, if you will, when they will have their huge participation in the process. We can't expect only the traditional developed industrialized nations to have commitments or obligations. Something we see is that at this point the urgency and the scale of the climate change is so big that we are going to have to use every single mechanism, every single nation to reach some sort of agreement that takes obviously into account the vast range of different realities, priorities, and possibilities, but still get a consensual agreement towards the global objective. Certainly China, and I may say in the US, we've seen China now with the 6 pilots in operation, and a 7th one, Chongqing, just coming in the second half of 2014. Just with the 6 pilots in operation, we already have them as the 2nd largest carbon market in the world, covering over 1.1 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. All of those, each one of them, cover from 35 to 60% of the greenhouse gas emissions in their respective jurisdictions. If you think 60% is more than the EU ETS, and it's more than what the experience we had in the past, in other words, the level of ambition is also increasing. So probably the conclusion is that the big expansion is not because of just the existing schemes are expanding, but also new schemes are becoming operational, and their overall level of ambition of coverage is also increasing. One of the key points is that we have to understand that all of those mechanisms, either carbon tax or ETS, they will always be aligned with the national priorities and with the domestic realities. So, and also they're not going to diverge from or disconnect from the international dialogue on climate change. So once they see something coming, they don't want to eventually to go too far, and they want to understand what they can do to be fully recognized when an international agreement comes. So this is the first thing. And go specifically on your question of offsetting. So you see that many of the mechanisms actually do accept domestic offsets mainly, not just in ETSs but in carbon taxes. And we have 3 examples here: Mexico, Australia, and South Africa. The 3 of them have limits and have accept their compliance entities to reduce their carbon tax also with the usage of domestic offsets. A little less on international, and again, that's because of they keep their eyes on the dialogue on climate change. So in 2015, if we get a comprehensive, consensual mechanism or agreement, probably we're going to see more an increased also usage of international offsets in those mechanisms. If you see that today's compliance markets have probably overachieved what they had in terms of commitments, additional action now comes from voluntary buyers. And they will certainly have to draw a lesson from what the voluntary market provides. So some of the big countries now involved in carbon markets, so we can name Sweden, we can name Norway, we can UK and several others. I don't want to leave anyone aside, but they continue their climate action based on voluntary objectives and goals, and so the borderline between what is a compliance, what is a pre-compliance, what is a voluntary, is much blurred now than it used to be in the past. No, I think it's part of the process that we are going to have to understand that it's going to be always 2 steps forwards, 1 back until they get to the right point. And again, it's going to be aligned with the domestic priorities and realities. And so we couldn't, if we imagine the UETS had to start with the pilot phase in 2005, grandfathering all allowances. And that was the only way for them to convince the industry to embrace, do something. So in other words, I don't see that a negative indication or a step back at a long run doesn't provide good lessons. In fact, Dirk today in the plenary, he was absolutely correct when he pointed out that nobody should see CDM as a failure, as it was alluded in the conference. No, actually, it created awareness necessary for China to do what it's doing, and for California, and for Mexico, and for Australia, and for South Africa, and so many others. I think the market requires predictability. If they know it's inevitable, they know it's coming, they're going to move. And CDM has proven it. And once the policy came in place, people were concerned about prices going up and said, no, you have to be concerned on creating continue providing the momentum. Supply will come. The market with the private sector will jump into opportunities once the policy provides this ground for them to step in. They deal with the credit risk. They deal with a lot of uncertainties. The market doesn't deal with the regulatory uncertainty. That has to be provided, that certainty, by the public side.